Good day to everyone. Hello again, and welcome to one of the last few sessions of FS 131. This time we'll be discussing the developments in sensor evaluation within, well, the past 2 decades or so, but things that usually have not yet been incorporated into our regular curriculum. First, we look at the trends, and then we'll look at multivariate analysis and how it can be used in sensory evaluation to accomplish a lot of great things. So you may have heard about prop from before, 6N-propylthiouracil. It's a compound that is tasteless to certain individuals but highly bitter to others. So we have what we call, again, the taster status. This has been a study done by Prof. Villarino for quite some time. Even when I was a student, we were part of her study. And generally, prop tasters have more fungiform papillae in their tongues, and it relates to possibly having increased trigeminal nerve stimulation, and it's evidenced by having um, higher sensitivity to, well, at the very least, bitter tastes. Okay, so the trigeminal nerve functions in terms of perception of oral texture, and thus prop taster status was also found out by Grimsley to be related to fat perception and preferences related to oral texture. So that's on top of tasting. All right. Also, because of the increased sensitivity to bitter tastes, um, those with higher prop sensitivities have higher aversion for bitter tasting products, and that is why some have found the correlation, for example, that non-tasters are more likely to be alcoholics. Personally, when I was part of that study, the results came out, and um, I was a super taster, allegedly. Although I do have an aversion to bitter things, I didn't seem to quite exhibit the other expected abilities of a super taster to really perceive food. So I don't know if mine's just an extra sensitivity to bitterness without the extra sensitivity to other things, or perhaps it's a matter of being mindful about eating your food and intentionally seeking out the flavor and texture profiles. So among the many other studies on prop, there was found to be a decreased preference for sweet foods as prop sensitivity increased. So parang madali na silang maumay sa matamis. That's not the case for me though. Okay. So I'm starting to doubt if the results of prop taster status are conclusive, because I was a case study. All right. And then of course there's an increased fat perception that is highly correlated with the ability to taste prop. So madali ka ring maumay sa mga oily or fatty foods. And non-tasters have dietary behaviors that increase cardiovascular disease risk, okay, and greater CVC risk than other tasters as well. So parang kung non-taster ka at kailangan mo ng maraming asin at asukal para masarapan sa pagkain, then obviously may trade-off yon pagdating sa um, heart disease, no? So other than prop, there's also PTC or phenylthiocarbamide. Similarly, it's a substance na nagva-vary yung sensitivity ng mga tao depende sa taster status nila. So as I mentioned before, nalilink nga sa alcoholism yung low sensitivity to these two bitter compounds. In our class back then who participated, may isa kaming classmate na lumabas dun sa test na non-taster siya, and true enough, doon sa klase, siya yung malakas uminom. Okay. Um, in terms of smoking as well, sensitivity to proper PTC is associated with reduced odds of smoking. So, I think totoo naman to, no? Kasi when back in my younger days when my cousin who smoked asked me to smoke, sobrang napaitan ako dun sa lasa niyan. So I never touched a cigarette again, no? For ano lang, just to try. So for an article summary of how taster status may affect health or impact your food choices, you may read this article. Okay, or search it online or put it in the links as well. Again, still on taste threshold and preferences, various studies generally have found out na kapag mas mahilig ka sa matamis ay linked ito sa weight gain and obesity, as well as kapag impaired yung taste detection mo ay associated din ito sa obesity. This is because probably hindi ka madaling maumay, alright? And of course, the more sugar you need to put in to achieve that certain sweet taste na kailangan mo ay mas maraming calories din yun, no? So, um, yun, or parang if you eat foods high in fats and oils, tapos hindi ka naman na nagkakaroon ng aversion dito dahil nga mabagal mag-perceive or mahina yung perception ng dila mo, then you're likely to eat more of them, no? So, it's not really per se about dahil gusto mo lang ng mas matamis, but rather in the first place, yung matamis na sa iba, yung lasa sa'yo, hindi ganun katamis yung dating kaya gusto mong dagdagan pa, no? Um, so there, you could partly blame your genes, but again, knowing this, of course, we can exercise self-control and hopefully develop products to address these negative impacts of ingredients. Alright, so again, another study, although medyo luma na ito mga to, but still relevant. So diabetic patients and their healthy relatives usually have higher glucose thresholds, meaning to say you need more sugar to be able to detect the sweetness. And of course, mas hindi nila preferred yung hindi maalat na mga foods, no? Compared to non-diabetics. So it's good to note here yung healthy relatives, no? Kasi of course, when you consume something like a cake, you consume it with maybe your household, kaya nai-impact din yung mga relatives mo kahit hindi ikaw mismo yung may diabetes. Okay, and then it was also found out that the hypertensive patients have an elevated salt taste threshold, meaning to say, they need more salt para ma-feel yung alat sa isang food. So, maaring ito ay through time, nag-a-adapt yung taste buds nila. Or posible din naman genetically, hindi talaga sila sensitive sa asin, kaya parang maalat na sa iba sa kanila, hindi pa nila malasahan or bland pa yung taste ng food, kaya taktak pa more sila ng asin. Okay? In animal and human studies, alcoholism was associated with sweetness preference. So, parang ano na rin ito, no, sa overall sensitivity ng dila mo sa lahat ng bagay. Because obviously, unless masokista ka, hindi mo naman gugustuhin ng sobrang pait na drinks, no? Pero kung sakto lang yung pait niya para sa'yo dahil mababa yung sensitivity mo sa bitter taste, and all other tastes for that matter, then you're likely to drink more. So this is not really new, but and you may have heard of it, pero there are products in the market that use aromas to suppress our or deter our hunger, no? So pag nag-inhale ka ng mga odors, parang mawalan ka ng ganang kumain, and thus it will induce weight loss in that way. This doesn't necessarily mean na parang mabaho yung naamoy mo, no? Pero there are aromas that could, of course, induce weight loss. So, ang ginagawa dito is parang tinatanggal niya yung gana mong kumain by making the pleasantness, quote-unquote, of the food subside. Meanwhile, in the field we call aromacology, there is a technique called mood mapping, which simply divides responses to fragrances as either negative or positive and collates this in a database which is called Scent Emotions, developed by International Flavors and Fragrances. They do have a branch in the Philippines, although it's a small one and mostly just for sales. And we've had various students in the past years have their OJTs there, including one of our faculty members. So, for example, they have 8 major categories for mood adjectives. Either it's happiness, sensuality, relaxation, or stimulation. And for negative ones, irritation, stress, depression, and apathy. So amazing that a certain aroma could evoke or conjure these kinds of emotions from people. So how they do this is to have a lot of people evaluate the aromas and then assign probably the negative or positive association words associated with them. Um, this orange flower cream fragrance identified by IFF, supposedly a unique blend of magical floral accords, is supposed to evoke happiness and relaxation. So, of course, this may be related to the much more common or mainstream aromatherapy thing that we can usually find in malls, and maybe some of your relatives are doing this, no? So, may science naman talaga behind using certain aromas to make us calm or relax. So as you can see, it's called mapping, no? Because it's set on a quadrant and depending on the responses, they're placed on certain quadrants, no? So we have ones for high and low arousal, and then for positive and negative moods. For example, here we have clementine and vanilla bean. And as you can see from their profile versus based on the responses of those who evaluated. So may parang pinaka score siya kung anong feelings yung na-evoke nila mula sa iyo. Okay, on the other hand, there's what we call yung issue ng taste modification. So, naturally, yung mga tao, supposedly sa kanilang evolution or what, ay na-attract sa sweet, salty, and umami tasting foods dahil ito yung nagko-contribute daw sa health. And may nagsasabi din na yung sour and bitter taste perception ay naging protective mechanism against the ingestion of certain substances because most of the or may paniniwala noon na yung mga bitter substances ay maaaring nakakalason. Although we know na in modern times, since we were able to refine things as compared to eating things raw or as raw materials na niluto lang, hindi naman ito parating totoo. In fact, maybe the reverse is true now because most processed foods are sweet, salty, and devoid of nutrients, and some of the bitter food we eat actually contain a lot of antioxidants, phytochemicals, and the like. And nonetheless, the issues we have now are, of course, because healthy components are often bitter. And then we know that sugar and salt consumption, high levels of these, contribute to the non-communicable disease, which have been among the top causes of death, no, in terms of non-communicable diseases worldwide. And of course, we also have an obesity pandemic, so to speak, especially in most modern nations. Okay, so kung mapapansin nyo, nag-change venue tayo. I'm at my parents' house. Ito po yung reality na kung gusto kong makapag-record during daylight hours without being interrupted by my 2-year-old, I have to physically be away from them. So, ganun po talaga ang realidad ng new normal, especially for teaching. So, let's look at the taste modification approaches currently being done. You might be familiar with the advertisement na tinanggal namin ang pait ng isang coffee na hindi daw masyadong mapait. So, if you remove the compounds that cause the bitter taste through whatever separation process, one problem though would be the possible loss of health benefits if said bitter compounds contribute to the health benefits of the product, such as kung meron itong mga um, flavonoids or antioxidants or the like, no? Another thing is you may mask bitter components with certain flavor, salt, or sugar. So, para mabawasan yung pait, dagdagan mo ng asin at asukal, etc. But we all know that adding salt and sugar is not always a good thing, especially for people with well, comorbidities and yung mga sakit-sakit, no, na may kinalaman sa high levels of salt and sugar like diabetes and hypertension. Okay, another thing is to prevent the bitter component from contacting the taste buds. So these may involve things like microencapsulation. Okay, so the components are there, the health benefits are retained, but they are physically prevented from being tasted. So pag na-digest nyo, okay naman. Nga lang medyo mahal ito. Okay? We also have the addition of bitter taste blockers as a possible solution. One compound that exhibits such ability is AMP or adenosine monophosphate. So what bitter taste blockers do is they literally block the receptors that perceive bitter taste in your mouth, so that even if there are bitter compounds, you will not be able to taste them, or at least hindi ganun kapait, no? And another one would be the use of natural high-intensity sweeteners, such as Purelo from China and stevia. Okay, although of course non-nutritive sweeteners also have their issues in relation to how the body responds. Even if there is no sugar, the body responds apparently as if there's still sugar, and therefore some research suggests that non-nutritive sweeteners are not as effective in weight loss, although of course this is a new field and we still await further evidence. Other approaches include the use of natural sweetness potentiators. So parang nag-amplify sila ng sweetness so that for the same taste, you only need to use a smaller quantity of sugar. There are also using combination of fructooligosaccharides with artificial sweeteners. So fructooligosaccharides are lower calorie um, saccharides, but they also have lower sweetness. So for the same weight, to get the same sweetness as pure sugar, you need to add non-nutritive sweeteners. No, but again, they're lower calorie overall. And also, there are also bitter taste blockers used for potassium chloride. Potassium chloride is a salt alternative, and yun nga yung problem sa kanya, may parang halong bitter taste siya. But it helps solve the hypertension issues kasi wala ng sodium, sodium yung nagkukos ng um, bad effects apparently, no, sa mga hypertensive patients. So you can just read through yung mga nasa slides na to, no? It's Cenomix, which has already been acquired by one of the major food ingredient manufacturers na nag-supply din sa Pilipinas. So actually, when you look at the suppliers for flavors, fragrances, and yung mga ingredients used in small quantities, functional ingredients, usually they're at the forefront of R&D, especially for sensory evaluation. Because to be able to sell their product, they have to know the science behind it and offer it properly to their potential buyers who produce products in the millions of tons, no, annually. So Canary defines sensometrics as the application of statistics and mathematics and computer science to sensory and consumer studies, encompassing tools that can be used for product development, quality assurance, and market research. This is maybe just a beefed up example of what we do with our data, okay? And two major examples of this are free choice profiling and the GPA, and also preference mapping. So if you will compare sensometrics to what we're doing in the lab or in our with our data, tayo hanggang ano lang, 'di ba, hypothesis testing, but they can do data modeling, and they can also design and then analyze the results of their sensory experiments, leading to the proposal of new sensory measurements with their very specific analysis. No? So, hindi na tayo confined lang sa yung mga dekahon na test natin, but with proper utilization of software and analytics, we could actually tailor our sensory tests na very specific. So apologies for the low resolution, but here's one example of preference mapping plot. I think you may have seen other examples in the previous modules. And this one now involves the principal component analysis of aroma profiles of Philippine vinegars. So alam ko pag tinignan nyo medyo nakaka-confuse what the heck are these things, but these are more advanced analysis usually done with computers to generate equations that could describe factors affecting whatever correlations we might have, no? Multiple correlations, and telling us what factors affect the data set that we have. So some things that have been done or you can do with sensometrics include optimization of liking for a specific sensory attribute. Okay, and parang how do you adjust your let's say formulation and or process parameters to arrive at a product na kung ano yung gusto mong hedonic rating na makuha niya ay makukuha mo. Parang may predictive modeling na rin siyang nalalaman, no? You can use it to check for sensory panel performance if you have, let's say, a descriptive test, no? And then using powerful statistical or computer tools to relate consumer profiles to sensory test results, and also to the sensory test results to instrumental data. And also we'll be discussing later the multivariate analysis na approach to data analysis. So you may have heard of this in your other subjects, but we do have what we call the electronic nose and the electronic tongue. So these are respectively equipment that could be used to analyze the gas and liquid phases of volatile or non-volatile compounds. So ano ba ang use ng mga electronic nose at electronic tongue na ito? You can analyze the chemical makeup of your compound para malaman kung saan nanggaling siya na geographical origin. As we know, like certain plants, may geographical markers yan na magkakaiba, like yung prutas na tinanim sa mango sa Guimaras versus sa Manila, maaring may difference sila sa chemical composition, no? That affect their aroma and flavor. You can use it to identify composition, of course, with the help of a chemical database, even the intensity of the flavors or aromas, okay? Using it to describe the degree of freshness by analyzing the makeup of the chemical compounds, and even analyze yung transmission of odors or gases from packaging materials, no? Yung mga packaging studies natin. So despite maybe having the assumption na dahil gumagamit ka ng instrument ay mas accurate sa tao, there will still be some issues with repeatability of results because we are using sensory array ng maraming different sensors, and maybe from one instrument to another, may possibility na magkaiba yung makuha mong result for the same sample perhaps. And you have to train the instrument as well, no? So parang unless may database ka na ma-access, it can analyze the compounds, but you have to feed it the information first to be able to make a database of the information with regard to your specific product being analyzed. So there are many technologies no, for electronic nose, but generally it just is parallel to kung paano tayo umamoy, no? Pag may kape, sisinghutin natin and then magkakaroon ng signals dun sa ating olfactory region leading to the brain interpreting, uy, kape to. Whereas dun naman sa electronic olfaction, you have various chemical sensors, processor, and something that compares the data to patterns and maybe a database and then tell you, uy, it's coffee. So here we have the eNose at DOST. So generally, ang pinaka-common na setup dito would be a gas chromatography machine, and yung converter mo dito would be usually mga mass spectrometers, no? So there are also mobile versions of the electronic nose, although I haven't seen one in person. It can also be used to um, analyze various things, but I think mostly pang medical yung use nito. Pero generally, yung malalaking electronic nose, sa pagkain, marami din siyang uses, no? For example, it's been used to analyze coffee aroma, to determine the roasting level and bean type. Okay, also used for beers and other aromatic food. And in the OST, they've used their electronic nose to characterize virgin coconut oil, vinegars, and soy sauce in coffee, and even to evaluate makapono flavor and maturity and post-harvest stability. So this one is using both the e-nose and the e-tongue. So the electronic tongue is for liquid counterpart ng eNose, and it could assume the same functions, albeit for um, liquid foods such as beverages and foods containing high amounts of moisture such as vegetables, fruits, fish, and meat. Okay, in here you can see the DOST's electronic tongue. So it could use different technologies such as a high performance liquid chromatography or even an array of different kinds of sensors to accomplish its goal. Here we have an example of a portable electronic thumb. So medyo dated, as you can see, yung lumang laptop na yung gamit, no? Anyway, it has the sensor array over here. Ito, yan yung top part na tinanggal mula dito sa taas. Okay. And so on. And you attach it to a computer, a portable one at that, para mobile din siya, no? And you can use it to process the data. Okay. Although, as with the e-nose, you also need to calibrate this sensor to the specific task it needs to do. So meron siyang scope and limitations pagdating dito kasi hindi siya universal na gagamitin mo sa kahit anong liquid and voila, it will tell you the components of that liquid, no? So what it does probably is more or less profile the various properties of that liquid and match that profile to whatever you're using it for, no? So it has to be very specifically calibrated dun sa gagamitan mo. Hindi siya yung punta ka sa supermarket, isaw-saw mo siya sa kung ano-anong beverage and then you get results, no? Hindi naman siya ganun kagaling. So we also have gas chromatography olfactometry or GCO analysis of aroma, also referred to as GC sniffing. So we know that when we say gas chromatography, no, it's a method that separates your your gas molecules based on their properties. So such that isa-isang lumalabas yung different types of molecules, no? And because of that, you can smell the individual compounds one by one dun sa sniffing port niya. We'll see a picture later. What this does then is characterize the odor of single compounds from complex mixtures. No? So for example, if certain aromas from, let's say, a fruit, no, are characterized by maybe 100 plus molecules, but only
one, two, or three of them provide the pinaka-characteristic na aroma. So, pwede mong i-separate yung mga yon doon, okay? And then, you can use this to trace compounds that cause of odors or ano yung alin bang mga compounds dito yung nagbibigay ng amoy ng food na yun. Let's say, for citrus fruits, you have limonene, etc. Or kung merong compound na nagkakos ng of odor, mahuli mo siya kasi ma-isolate mo siya. Unfortunately, when you evaluate the compounds one by one instead of as a whole, you're technically evaluating the compound out of its context, no? So, posibleng iba yung amoy niya pag pinagsama-sama mo na hindi mo makukuha yon just by sniffing the compounds one by one as they come out of the sniffing port. Thus, it also makes the evaluation of that single compound's contribution to the actual food very difficult, no? Lalo na kung minor siya. No? How does that a certain compound change the way we perceive that food? Kasi pag inamoy mo siya on its own, iba naman yung labas ng amoy niya, di ba? Iba yung dating sa'yo, right? So the alternative method that can be done is i-isolate mo yung isang aroma na yon, yung peak fraction na yon, and ihahalo mo siya at amoy mo rin siya dun sa subsequent evaluations para makita mo yung contribution niya doon sa mas kabuuan ng mga aromas na pinaghalo. Of course, one limitation as well is that mafafatig yung ilong mo sa kaamoy, okay? And there's no working around that, no? Kasi pag na oversaturate na yung ilong mo, kahit may trained panelist ka pa, there's only so much you can do. So some GCO techniques, one may involve extract dilution, and which involves a stepwise dilution of the extract, and each dilution will be evaluated by GCO. So what this does is, parang for each dilution, na-highlight mo kung ano yung mga strong compounds. So pag habang dinadilute mo, syempre mas may ibang compounds na mas lalabas yung aroma nila, mas dun sila bibida. Okay. And then there are different techniques used, so you can just research this on your own, the AEDA and the charm analysis. So the setups look like this. They may look dated, as you can see, yung computer parang 90s or late 80s pa, no? Hindi man lang colored yung screen. But generally, you have a computer in front of you for taking down notes and a sniffing port, okay, para maamoy mo yung compound as it comes out, and then you can type notes on your descriptions of it or whatever. And then you collate all that data afterwards. So we also have the use of emojis in sensory evaluation. No, dati yung mga smiley scale lang yung alam natin. Ngayon, emojis, of course, they don't just convey an ordinal level of something, but more of in a three-dimensional space or a range of different emotions. So some researchers looked at how useful emojis can be to describe the children's emotions when tasting food. So ano naman ang nangyari sa study nila? Pwede bang palitan ng emojis yung mga karaniwang use ng smileys, or are they more effective? Apparently, yes. So in this study, they used the children, although closer to teenage years, hindi yung mga sobrang bata, no? They used 33 emojis. Probably kung may social media accounts yung mga batang yun ay marunong silang gumamit ng mga yan. And they found out that the emojis were able to discriminate between product samples within the same product category. Let's say one burger to another, okay, and that these emojis have added value, okay, na higit pa dun sa liking lang. So apparently, probably you could have something like may picture ka, and then kung anong emoji pinag-describe sa food, and that could relate to how likely that food is to be chosen kung mabili siya. Of course, it cannot directly quantify levels, no? Kasi iba-ibang emotion to, parang three-dimensional space, hindi na navigate mo dito imbes na 2D. So this study by Yeager and friends conducted in US and China gives us an idea no, on the medyo universal use of emojis. No? Kahit magkaiba silang lengguwahe na sinasalita, the emojis tell pretty much the same things. No? So what did they find out? Emojis were used to measure emotional associations to food, and consumers on the average describe food quote unquote using 1 to 2 emojis, and parehas lang yung results from US and China. Okay, and that emoji responses to food names were repeatable, so that's always a good thing in research, and that the response is sensitive to consumer product liking and consumption frequency. So at least para masasabi natin, magagamit mo yung emojis para makorelate yon sa kanilang preference doon sa product. So in the past, sanay tayo na kapag nagsisensory ka, kailangan control yung environment, etc. Kaya gumagamit tayo ng mga sensory evaluation booth, no? Pero in this case, what they tried to do was look at the difference between the consumer responses to the same samples when presented in the traditional lab setting versus a simulated, in this case, dahil coffee yung sample, coffee shop setting. So, merong subtle cinnamon aroma pa, naka-coffee table siya, may picture, may video kunwari ng context ng coffee shop doon na nakikita niya. So, nasisimulate yung sounds, yung aroma, yung visuals. And what they found out was parang mas na-discriminate ng panelist yung coffee samples dito sa setup B compared dun sa lab setup. So, this is trying to debunk what we've been taught before na kailangan control yung setup and so on and so forth. But of course, this is a pioneering study, but it's something we could look into, no? Na when you consume the foods in their regular context, iba siya versus consuming them elsewhere. Of course, this has been probably proven dahil may mga pagkain na mas masarap kainin, let's say pag may kasama or kung nasa certain na place ka, parang ganun. So medyo ano pala yun, may effect pala talaga yun, no? So similar to the previous study, ito naman deals with vegetable freshness. Imbis pa rin na gumamit sila ng lab setting, gumamit sila ng, ayan, as you can see there, their immersive testing setup involving projected scenery, some props, and even audio, visual, and olfactory cues. Well, they found out na mas tumaas yung liking perception kapag nasa ganyang setting kesa nasa lab. On the other hand, though, bumaba yung discrimination ability ng panelist. So parang nakatulong siya na mapasarap yung pagkain, pero at the same time, they were less able to discriminate between the slight differences in the samples presented to them. So it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, though. So dito naman ang kinompare nila ay yung virtual reality setup against the sensory evaluation booths. No? So may iba't ibang mga eksena kunwari. And what they found out was, so they tested white milk and dark chocolate. No? While there were no differences found for white and milk chocolate across the different contexts, pagdating daw dun sa virtual live concert, which I assume is ito, ay mas naging positive daw yung outlook ng dark chocolate na negative dun sa ibang mga eksena. Okay, so how I wish we could use VR technology in our lab. But again, this is an emerging thing. No? We need more studies to validate the effects of this one. And I don't know about the actual uses. No? Parang, do they plan to use this maybe to have immersive VR na angkop dun sa pagkain na usually consumed in certain settings, like kung lechon ba yung ipapa-sensory mo, maglalagay ka ng kunwari fiesta o birthday na ano dyan, na background na VR view, no? I don't know, but maybe there are uses for this in the future. So just like most aspects of food science, sensory evaluation is something, a tool rather, that we could use towards promoting sustainable practices. As we know, in the first place, food waste does contribute a lot. Also, food packaging waste to the problems we're facing right now in our environment, or even its production. So, how can sensory evaluation be used in regards to sustainable practices? One is the promotion of dietary shift towards more sustainable foods and diets, such as the eating of insects, or maybe the substitution in part of meat consumption with meat alternatives, such as maybe mushrooms and meat analogs, for example. Increasing food diversity by introducing different foods to different cultures, so that eventually, if this gains ground, yung landscape mismo ng kung ano yung tinatanim at ano yung mga hayop na pinapalaki for food ay pwedeng magbago. You could also use this food waste reduction. Maraming paraan yan, no? Ano ba yung proper portion size para walang tapon? It differs by country, no? If you remember when you went to Japan back then, parang lahat ng bagay ay nakapackage for a family of 4, no? So, I don't know if maybe it was because of their government policy, which optimizes the family size to 4 individuals or something like that, no? But anyway, maraming pwedeng tignan, no? So actually, sa mga research, sa mga thesis, more often than not, may kahalong sensory evaluation yung ginagawa ng mga students as part of meeting their thesis goals. We also have enhancement of the circularity of the food system. So, yun yung mga approaches na hindi na lang farm to fork, pero parang cycle na siya, no? Whatever waste you have are integrated back into the food system towards sustainability. Hindi yung you end up with certain amounts of trash. Okay? And then there's also heightening and prioritizing food-related well-being. So yun nga, yung mga studies on emotions, how food makes you feel, and what can we do with food to improve the emotional health and well-being of people, and of course, to cope with the effects of climate change. So something as simple as an ingredient substitution for a product with ingredient na medyo environmentally damaging, you use sensory evaluation to test the acceptability or find the best alternatives for the product that would still give you the same, if not higher, consumer acceptance, but at the same time, lower environmental impact. So lastly, we have the use of artificial intelligence. We know how AI has impacted us, no? Alam mo, minsan, yung mga Facebook ads mo, bakit parang nababasa na nung Facebook yung isip mo dun sa mga balak mong bilhin, or may i-google ka lang na something and then for the next few days, ang dami mo nang natatanggap na ads about from that product category, no? Anyway, this all has to do with AI, specifically yung part na nag-a-analyze ng big data na tinatawag natin. So, if there is enough data na pwedeng i-share or collected and available for you to analyze, we can even answer things like predicting the consumer acceptance of a product that has not been yet launched into the market, no? Or if I do this ingredient substitution, ano ang mangyayari sa product ko. So, it can be used both for consumers and even for simply like predicting changes in the product formulation itself through physicochemical information databases, no? So, yan, yung pwede mong gawin dito is limitless, but you are limited by the amount of data you have, no? Or, I don't know, maybe you can train uh, a robot to be the next type of ideal panelist. Malayo pa naman yun, no? But who knows, in the future might happen.